Hey everybody, welcome back to Art History. And this is the first lecture, so we're in lecture 1. And for this week I'm going light because I understand that the first weeks of these semesters tend to take a second to kind of get up and running. I've heard from a few of you that have told me that because of where your financial aid is, you were just able to pick up the book. So, I understand that I wasn't going to assign you a lot of reading in the first week because I understand that you're going to be getting these books a little bit late. So we're just going to do one lecture this week, and then next week we're going to have a quiz on just this one lecture. So it's kind of to get you acclimated into the rhythm of this course and how it's going to hash itself out. In future weeks, we're going to be doing 2 lectures per week, every week. And occasionally there's going to be a third lecture, but those are just going to be really quick reviews. So to get started, I understand that this is probably the first art history course that a lot of you have taken. And for a lot of you, this is one of the first courses that you've taken in college. And so to help get you kind of just used to the way that this course runs and how art history as a field of study runs specifically within college institutions, I'm going to just kind of briefly get you up to speed with what's going to happen here. So you've all found this learning module in Blackboard. It's just called Week 1, and every week there's going to be a learning module titled whatever week we're on, and inside of that learning module you're going to see what you saw for this week, which is one file that is listed as a slide list for lecture 1 or for whatever lecture it is, and then you're going to see links to segments of video files. So for lecture 1 it's pretty self-explanatory, there's only one thing, but for the subsequent weeks when we have more than one lecture, you're going to see lecture, for instance next week there's going to be lecture 2 and lecture 3, but each of those are going to be put incrementally up on YouTube. That's something that YouTube does. That's not something that I want to do. I have to do these in 15-minute chunks because that's the limitation that YouTube allows us. So because of all that stuff, that we have first, second, third. And you guys saw that with the first lecture with introduction. So I know I'm just kind of going over things again, but it's always helpful. So we'll get into this lecture and how the lectures are actually paced, but before we start that, I want to walk you through just what the slide list is. It's pretty self-explanatory, but that said, it's always good to familiarize. So here we have slide list for lecture 1. It's a list of all the pertinent information of all of the slides that I'm going to be showing you. Occasionally during my lectures, there will be a slide that I show you that is not on the list. In those situations, you are not responsible for knowing any of the information about the work. If I've put a slide up without any information associated with it, I do that specifically because I need that picture in there to help me prove my point. And there's going to be one of these during lecture 1, so you'll see what I'm talking about. But generally speaking, the slide lists are going to have the artist. Let me put my thumb in the frame. The artist, 1. It's going to have the title of the work, 2. And it's going to have the date in which the work was finished. Now, a lot of art historians and a lot of art history textbooks will give you a ballpark period for when the work was being made. So, take for instance a picture I'm going to show you in just a little bit, Manet's Olympia, and it's right here on this slide list. Some art historians will say, Edouard Manet as the artist, the title of the work is Olympia, and the dates are 1861 to 1863, because we know that he was working on that picture for 2 years. I'm not going to be worried about that. I'm telling you when the works were finished And I'm judging that based on when we think the works were finished, or when they were displayed. So we know that Olympia caused a stir in the French art scene in 1863 because that's the year that it was displayed. That's the year that it was finished. Completed. Excuse me, I should be using more proper terms. So basically, here it is. Here is this list of all the works I'm going to show you. This slide lecture has 31 slides. I'm hoping that I can get that wrapped up in just under an hour, or under 4 sections of YouTube video clips, and I can do that. Trust me. Every one of these slide lectures, I'm hoping to only have them last for an hour. That's my task to myself. So for every lecture that you are assigned for the week, you have 1 hour of videos to watch. Which means if we have 2 lectures per week, you have 2 hours of lecture, and generally an hour to 2 hours of reading outside of that. That's about what you get when you have a course like this. You need to be doing that amount of work outside of this structure. So yeah, with that, I want to spend the rest of our little of this kind of introduction to lecture 1 talking a little bit about what we're going to expect with this course. Modern art, and this book does a good job of getting us into this conversation. The period that we refer to as modernism started around the same time as the Industrial Revolution. A buzzword, Jeopardy word, the Anthropocene is generally the period that we're talking about, which is a geological period that started in 1850 and goes till today. That's generally what modernism is. And basically, with the advent of things like trains and long-distance travel, electricity, there are all these exciting things that were going on around the Industrial Revolution. And it's not surprising that in that cacophony of events that art would also develop, that art would kind of have this explosion of creativity and of possibility. There's a lot of reasons why. I'm not really going to be too bogged down with why. I think Mr. Gompertz does a good job of signaling why exactly modernism matters. For us, though, I just want to show you some of these pictures and get you up to speed, as it were, with why these specific pictures and these specific artists are important. Alright, so first things first. This is, well, just have a look at this picture. This is a painting made by a British artist named John Abbott McNeill Whistler. Mr. Whistler was sued an art critic who wrote a negative review of this picture. The art critic, this man named John Ruskin, who Gompertz brings up, this art critic said that it is preposterous for Whistler to charge the amount of money that he was charging for this painting to have a pot of paint thrown in the public's face. He said that this work has no artistic merit. It's basically rubbish. It's indecipherable, and it generally makes no visual sense. And because of that review, which was publicly printed in a newspaper, Whistler sued Ruskin for libel. I always confuse libel and slander. Libel is when someone says something that, or maybe that's slander. I don't know. One of those two things, libel or slander. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to be. So Whistler sued him for defamation of character, and in the end, the court sided with Whistler, saying that it's inappropriate for Mr. Ruskin to make such negative claims against him. He called him a coxcomb, or the thing on a rooster. He's basically just this To be referred to in the 1850s as a coxcomb is the same as to be referred to as being cocky in today's environment, except it's deemed much more slanderous back then. So basically, Whistler won, but the judge thought that the legs on which the case stood, which I'll talk about in just a second, were kind of ridiculous, and he only gave Whistler a very, very small sum of money. I'm not going to tell you any of the monetary terms because they're antiquated. So, he basically gave Ruskin a slap on the wrist and told Ruskin to give Whistler like $5 or something, Now, the legs that the case was resting on is a term referred to as art for art's sake. Art for art's sake. Art for art's sake is, by and large, the legs on which all of modernism stands. Before modernism, an artist was an artisan. Generally, they had a studio, and patrons would come to their studio or contract them to come to their private homes, and there would be a very, very structured exchange. It was a business transaction. For example, American painter John Singer Sargent. He was painting around the same time as all of these painters I'm going to show you. He painted a lot of society portraits, and the way it worked was some gentleman wrote Sargent a letter and asked them to come to the house and paint a portrait of his wife or their children or whatever. And then Sargent would come to the house, he'd make preparatory drawings, he'd make a few preparatory sketches, then he'd go back to his studio, complete the work, and then give it to the collector for the agreed upon amount of money. It's kind of like the way that lots and lots and lots of other artisanal businesses operate, right? But what happens during modernism, and why I'm starting off with Whistler, why I'm deliberately not deviating away from Whistler, I really want you to be looking at this painting while I'm talking, and also my blabbering little head, is that art became for the sake of art. In other words, painters like Whistler and like the other folks farther down in today's slide list, they wanted to make painting that was about painting. They wanted to make art that was about art. They didn't want the patron to be in charge of what the painting looked like. They wanted to be in charge. The patron wanted that creativity. And so this is the first time that artistic genius, quote unquote, which we'll talk about a lot over the course of this term, this idea of artistic genius went from rendering something very beautifully, very naturalistically, very photorealistically, to being emotional, to being creative, to being exciting and new. New is the other big buzzword here. So all of these painters, they began to look at the history of painting that was slowly being studied in the developing field of art history. It was slowly being exhibited in newly founded institutions to show art. Before 1780, there really weren't that many art museums to speak of. By 1850, there's a lot. And so painters are going to museums, they're seeing the work of these old masters, and they want to make work that's new, that's about today, that's about a different kind of experience. Whistler is the perfect example of this penchant in artist creativity. He wanted to make a painting that was quite literally an image of an exploded firework, and the firework is exploding outside of the frame of the picture, and the falling ash onto the Thames River, or the River Thames, which is the river that cuts through downtown London. And that's what he did. And so, quite honestly, this painting is of a scene. And when you understand what you're looking at, it's a night scene with falling embers. It makes sense. But it's new, it's creative, it's individual, and it's painting that's never been seen before. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.